whether they're stated or not, the actual lived values and behaviors of your leadership team will inform the entire culture of your organization.
Okay, Work Positive Nation, true or false? Leaders lead out of who they are, their beliefs and habits. And who they are directly shapes the work culture they create. I was on another podcast recently and the host asked, Dr. Joey, what's one thing leaders can do today to create a positive work culture? I said, work on themselves. You can only lead with what you have within. So my answer is true. What do you say? My guest on this episode of the Work Positive Podcast brings a structured and intentional process that guides leaders in becoming individuals who foster a healthy team environment. His approach ensures that personal growth and leadership development go hand in hand to create a sustainable, positive culture within teams. In fact, he wrote a book about it, Train to Lead, to help us do just that. So lean in, listen up, and let's learn to grow people and profits on this episode of the Work Positive Podcast. Are you ready, Work Positive Nation, to start working on yourself so that you can create that positive work culture with your team better? Well, here's the man that has the intentional, sustainable process, and we're going to learn all about it today on this episode of the Work Positive Podcast. Help me welcome Christian Muntean. Christian, thank you so much for joining us on Work Positive Podcast.
Yeah, it's great to be here, Joey.
I am delighted to have you on. So how did you get into this work of the leader and culture and the personal journey of the leader and how that shows up in culture?
Yeah, great question. For me, it was sort of I began my career in international disaster relief. So I was working in conflict zones and disaster zones in different countries. And the short answer to the question is I began to see that I could be in an environment that was relatively secure and in a very well-funded project, and we would still struggle massively to be successful, and the team would struggle with getting along with each other well if we weren't led well. On the other hand, I could be in an active conflict that was a very insecure environment in underfunded projects, and if we were led well and the team got along well, we could accomplish really almost anything we tried to do, and it felt good to be there. It felt like it was a good experience. And so I thought the work we were doing was important enough that we should understand how to lead and manage and understand team dynamics. And so that became a focus of study for me afterwards and just an interest and ultimately, through a winding path became a career.
Was that a challenging realization for you, Christian? Because most of us associate the financial metric and the environmental metrics as being the keys to success for any initiative.
You mean challenging to recognize that? Yeah, it was, especially when I was moved into positions of responsibility and realized that I was part of the factor that was creating problems and didn't want to anymore, but didn't really know what to do. And so, and I think that's very common so in the disaster relief context, not entirely unlike your average corporate context, a lot of times people get promoted or put into positions of responsibility due to you're the nearest warm body there and they need somebody to fill the job. And so you end up in positions that you really weren't prepared for. And then typically learning how to lead, learning how to manage a team, learning how to create a culture that feels good, but is also high performance. Those are all viewed as like elective trainings that are often never offered or provided, or when they are, they're not substantive enough to really help. And so, anyways, that's become a fascinating topic to me because I think it's central to not just culture and having a good place to work, but also performance.
Yeah, it really, really turbocharges performance when you pay attention to those other things.
Yeah.
But Christian, so many times, whether I'm a business owner or an HR leader, as you said, I'm just looking for a warm body or the proximity to that position.
Right.
You were on that team. You did a great job building widgets. Hey, congratulations, you're peak widget
Yeah.
builder. So we're going to make you the manager.
Yeah.
A whole nother conversation there, buddy, to
Yeah.
lead people, right?
Yeah. It's a totally different animal. And the same thing happens if you're running your own company. You start out being very good at whatever you're doing,
Mm,
usually. Then as your company grows and you begin to build a team and you begin to staff up, your job eventually becomes something different than what you
mm,
started out as. And
mm,
so a conversation just had yesterday with a client who's building his company and he's starting to grow, and with one of his partners who's having an issue. He's just frustrated with the partner. And I said, look, this is your job. This is now your job. Now that you've got a people who are out there technically doing the work, your job to a large degree is building the culture and growing your people. And so even though it is frustrating that this person has these kind of negative behavior patterns, part of your job is to, especially since she's a partner and not just an employee,
mm.
is to try to nurture this person and grow them through this. If you don't, you're just stuck with a bad situation. And and I think that kind of helped the light bulb, hopefully,
Mm.
turn on for him that his job was different than just bringing in business and just executing on projects. That it was now his team.
It's a tough transition to go from founder to now CEO or president of a company, isn't it, Christian?
It is, and I don't think people in that position understand that there's a distinction.
Mm,
Not that they're not the same thing, or that not that they can't connect to each other, but they don't understand that there's a difference between wearing this founder hat, where uh, you have a different kind of a way of relating, to actually functioning as a CEO, which is a function within an organization that
mm,
allows it to operate well.
mm. Well, so often founders start off, if I think of entrepreneurs, right? Got to do everything, and sure, you're doing everything from swabbing toilets to bringing in
Yeah,
business, right? And
yeah,
and so you discover pretty quickly as the business begins to toddle, if you will,
yeah,
that man, I can do everything, but I can't do it all at once.
right. Yeah, people discover that, and really the question for them at that point is, are they willing? Usually what emerges at that point is an issue around either trust or identity or both. And so there is this belief that I can do everything and I'm very special and very smart and very important because of that, and no one else can do everything like me.
Hmm.
And you might be right, but then also you can't build very much if you're doing everything. And then the second thing is trust. Like, how can I trust that anyone else will actually do a good job or take care of this company the way I do?
Hmm.
And so those are the initial challenges I find for companies that are smaller, that are trying to get over that initial hump of, I'm wearing all the hats or too many hats.
Hmm. Yeah. Good enough is 80% of how you do it done by someone else, Dan Martell says. So, that helps me just learning to live with a good enough, but more to the point of identity and trust. I'm going to morph my identity now into a different role than I was when I was the founder. So here we're getting really into that personal identity, the personality of the leader. When I'm beginning that trust walk, if you will, into inviting other people, how do I go about attracting talent and rather than micromanaging them, releasing them to go do what it is they do best?
Right. So the question around attracting talent, I use this concept called that I call a magnetic organization, like building an organization that attracts, builds, and retains the best people. And if you look at research around this, um, the average performers are attracted to a different kind of workplace than high performers. And the kinds of things that attract high performers tend to be some of the more softer elements, it's more important to them to work in a place where they feel respected, where they feel challenged, where they feel like they can kind of flex their muscles in a positive way, like stretch and grow and try to become uh, really kind of do all the things that they might be able to do.
Mm, mm,
Average performers are going to be more transactional. Compensation is going to matter more to them. The benefits package is going to matter more to them. It matters to everyone. A high performer should know their worth and their value, but they do know it. And in today's hiring environment, they can go get that anywhere. And so, really, what they're looking for is these cultural elements of the relational dynamic and the opportunities that are provided in terms of the experience of working there. And so, what I encourage a company that's growing is to really do the fluffy bunny work of identifying your values and your vision and then translating, here's what our values. So most companies will say something like integrity is a value. It's a common one.
mhm,
And so I would interpret, what does integrity mean then for our sales team? What does integrity mean for our administration? What does integrity mean for the leadership team as we make decisions? Like, how is it expressed
mm,
in each of these contexts? Because we assume that people come in and all have the same interpretation of the word integrity, but they don't.
mm,
And so we want to make sure that we've defined that for them. Then what I encourage is that you use this in your recruiting material, whether you're actually overtly saying integrity is one of our values or whatever your values are, or you're just describing to the behaviors that you see as having integrity. And you use that in your recruiting material so that the kind of people who are attracted to that kind of place notice you. What typically happens in recruiting, this is a huge mistake on HR, and I'm not an HR expert, but this is a huge mistake that many recruiters and HR folks make, is they try to make as wide of a mouth to the funnel as possible and
right.
suck in as many applicants as they can. And
Mm,
I encourage that you narrow that down as much as possible and make it very, very clear. We're only looking for people that have integrity, have these traits, have those traits, are attracted to this, want to work with that.
mhm,
And what will happen is it'll make your company stand out from all of the other job opportunities out there. As for the people who naturally identify with aspects of your culture, they'll say, that's the place I want to get hired by. That's the place I want to work.
mm,
Then you have to follow through on that
ooh,
with your screening, orientation, and your training. So you have to live up to your own culture. If you do that, the likelihood of you retaining those folks for a longer than average tenure will go up significantly.
mm. Yeah, so that's the attraction factor. Here's our culture internally. Now we're just
Yeah.
messaging that and exporting that externally. David Friedman was here on the Work Positive podcast 3 years ago. Culture wise, he really emphasizes behavior. And
Yeah.
that's what I hear you talking about, clarity
Yes.
around behavior.
Yeah.
So how do we, I mean, we've all been through the mission, vision, values exercises for 100 years now or so.
Right.
Okay, maybe 59 years. But how do you work with your clients to transform value statements into behavior statements?
Right. So I try, it's kind of an iterative process because it's abstract and they don't always understand it. So I often work with my clients for a long time. And so I don't try to handle everything in one workshop. I think that the usefulness or the value of vision and value statements and mission statements has been eroded through, I don't know, marketing people that see value in them,
Mm,
but don't understand that the purpose or the original intent. And also, honestly, I think it's become a catchy thing that consultants like myself sell, who also don't fully understand how to use the tool or what it's for. I tell my clients, so part of my background is in woodworking, or my hobby, I should say.
oh,
I'm
sweet.
more enthusiastic than skilled, but that's part of what I do.
I
But one of
understand.
the thing, yeah. So one of the things you want in woodworking, and a tool that you'll always carry on you, is a square and some kind of a measuring device.
Sure.
And so your values and your vision should be the same way. Your values should describe, if integrity is a value, and I wanted my sales team to operate with integrity, then we'll say, okay, in all of our language that we use, whether it's marketing language or when we're talking to a customer, we're going to honestly represent the facts. We're not going to sell a customer something if it doesn't actually fit them or doesn't match them. We're going to, I have one client, this was an auto dealership.
Mm.
And so they're not known for integrity, right? As an auto dealership is an
As a
idiom
vocation, yeah.
for a lack of integrity.
Right.
And so when I was working with them on a culture change process, I was like, hey guys, this is like the lowest bar. Like all you have to do is be the trusted dealership
Yeah.
and you're going to stand out. And so one of the things they did is they got rid of the whole process of I need to go talk to my finance manager to see if I can make this deal.
Wow.
And they said they switched things up so that the salesperson you're talking to and you thought you just made an agreement with can make the deal with you on the spot. They also got rid of hidden fees so that the deal you made is the price that you were paying. It wasn't like all of a sudden there's all these other fees connected to it.
Ballooned, right.
Yeah. And so they part of their interpretation of integrity was let's get rid of some of the games. Let's get rid of some of the lack of transparency and just trust that if we treat our customers right, they're going to come back and have their vehicles serviced by us. They're going to buy another vehicles from us. They're going to refer to us, and overall, we'll do more business. And so, does that help explain like how they translated that to behavior?
Oh, absolutely, because those are case specific to that particular industry. You saw what Jesse Cole with the Savannah Bananas refers to as a friction point, right?
Yeah.
So there was friction in the relationship, and you removed that friction, brought it down to where here's what integrity looks like.
Well, I'm going to bring up one more point about this too. It was a dealership group, but they owned one of their dealerships, one of the brands that they owned, which was a Subaru brand. Because of this culture process, they became the highest performing. This is in Anchorage, Alaska. They became the highest performing dealership within North America.
Within all of North America?
Yeah. Wow. Enough so that Subaru sent up a documentary crew to do a documentary about them and show the rest of the dealerships how to do this. So this is not just feel-good stuff. If you do it right and you translate it to behavior, it will translate to your bottom line.
Yeah, so you're growing people and profits. My friend Lindsay Dowd likes to, she's on a mission to eradicate the words soft skills and replace it with power skills.
Oh, I like that.
That's really what you're talking about is you're redefining the power in the relationship and beginning to pay attention, whether you're attracting top talent or whether you're working with customers and just ensuring. So how do I ensure that our values are getting lived out through that kind of behavior? What are some things I can do in my culture?
Well, if you've defined your behaviors well enough, so let's just use the example of the dealership. And so if you're part of your dealership is that your salespeople, your sales force should be communicating in a certain way and setting up expectations in a particular way, then you can measure those behaviors. Like, are we communicating and then selling exactly what happened? And some of that, in their context, all dealerships that are selling for a manufacturer will have some kind of a customer service or a customer survey that goes out with
satisfaction survey.
The deal. Right. Yeah, and manufacturers pay really close attention to those. So those are kind of built-in measurements. But if you've defined your behavior well, this should be something that's observable. And if it's observable, you can measure it in some way. And so you just find out what the metric is for when we walk somebody through the sales process. Were they told this? Did their expectations match reality? And that's affirmed through the survey. And then we can measure that that's happening.
Now you said if we've clearly defined the behavior, what are some ways that we can clearly define behavior to encourage the kind of culture we really want?
Yeah, it's a set of questions. So here's another value that people like. They'll say something like community or family. So let's say, okay, a value here is family.
Yeah.
I don't know what that means. And if I come into your workplace,
whose family are we talking about, Christian?
Yeah, is this my family, or is this, the idea of people having families? Is it having, or are we a family, or are we? What do we mean by it? So the way you put handles on the term family is just to ask questions. Like when you see a company that has family as a value, what do you notice them doing or experiencing that's different than what you guys are experiencing right now?
Mm,
Or when we do family, something that you consider family, what are we doing?
mm, mm,
When we're not doing it, when you feel like this value of family is being violated, what just happened or what didn't happen?
mm,
And I keep asking questions like this until we get to some very specific answers that, okay, family means when somebody's sick or when somebody needs help, we look out for them. Okay, well, we can start to put behaviors around that.
mm,
Family means we celebrate each other.
mm,
Okay, we can put some behaviors around that. And it's you just start drilling it down. But you have to have a very high intolerance for ambiguity. And you
mm.
have to be able to recognize it because a
Mhm,
word like family feels like a complete answer, but it's really not. It just gives
mhm,
you a sense of direction.
mhm. Yeah, well, it depends on if you're talking about the Muntean family or the Fawcett family, right? Because I mean,
Absolutely.
we
Yeah.
roll totally different. And
Yeah.
frankly, Christian, for some people's families, I don't want to be a part of. So,
Yeah, and that's true because a lot of people come from really rough family backgrounds
Mhm,
and or they have a more creative understanding of what a normal family experience should feel like or be like. And so you don't want to leave it up to random chance on how people interpret any of your value statements.
mhm,
I have a client that here's a very trendy term is a diversity is one of their values. So that's almost always defined in a particular way.
sure.
They define it specifically as we will listen to opposing points of view.
Wow.
That's how they define diversity is they're looking at it on a um, diverse perspective approach.
Mm,
And I found that interesting because I made them define all of them. It was interesting when that's the answer that came out. And I was like, it's good that we clarified that because that isn't the first thing that comes to everyone's mind. Not that they're not looking for a diverse workforce in the ways that it's more broadly defined, like ethnic or
mhm,
gender or other types, but what they specifically meant is we want diverse perspectives. That allows you to define behaviors on how do we handle this in management meetings when somebody disagrees with what's with a policy.
uh-huh,
How do we handle this when a client is not happy with something that you're doing?
mm,
How do you handle this if administration is frustrated with how management is making a decision and so on?
mm, mm. I love it. I love it. So words which have common meaning or common associations and to the general public may mean something quite different within our company. So giving
Yeah,
that specific definition to those behaviors is essential. Christian
yeah.
Muntean is my guest on this episode of the Work Positive Podcast. If you want to go over to christianmuntean.com, the link is in the show notes there, and you can, we'll talk more in a minute about what's there, as well as his book, Train to Lead. So, Christian, what do you see as some of the challenges for business owners and HR leaders today in creating the kind of positive work culture we're talking about here?
The primary challenge is people allow culture to evolve on accident. And so culture always evolves. Everybody has a work culture.
All
You
right.
have one. And most often culture. So I first really observed this when I was working with, I was consulting to a pretty large nonprofit. And at the time, I was primarily working with frontline teams and their management. And I started to notice that I could go from department to department and they all had the same issues. Like they'd call me in, work with the team. We have conflict on the team, help us out with that. My first book was on conflict and leadership. And so that became a big thing that everybody was asking me to help them with for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And, but I began to notice like this is a repetitive theme across this organization. And it seems to always come down to a tendency on these teams to avoid conflict, to avoid talking about hard things,
Mm.
and a tendency for management not to hold their team to account. Like these were common traits that came up. Different personalities, completely different teams working at completely different uh, areas of service and so on.
Mm.
And what began to wonder is, I wonder how high up this goes, because this feels cultural to me now, not just a team
Right.
issue. And I ended up getting invited or asked by the executive team to come in and work with them. And the two issues that they had was an avoidance of conflict and refusal, really, to relate to accountability, to receive accountability and to provide it.
Mm.
And I began to recognize that the whether they're stated or not, the actual lived values and behaviors of your leadership team will inform the entire culture of your organization.
Mm.
And yeah, and so it becomes really important to become intentional about that. So if you're dealing with repetitive issues, it's important for leadership teams to think about, okay, are my values actually in alignment with our values?
Mm.
Are my behaviors really in alignment with those? And am I willing to actually adjust those? And if not, then what conversations do we need to have? How do we
Mm.
be honest about this? I was invited by or I was called by a Fortune 500 company to help them. They said, we've got this behavior. They didn't describe the behavior, but it's a problem throughout the entire company, 30,000 employees. And we need your help, or we
Mm.
need somebody's help. They were trying to decide if they wanted to work with me. And I said, well, if this is a problem throughout your company, um, does this also behavior show up on your executive team? They said, oh, yeah. I said, okay, does it also show up on the board? And they said, yes. I says, here's the deal. I could offer you a proposal where I bring in a team and we do mass trainings across 30. I mean, that would be a gold mine for somebody in my space.
Sure.
But really, we need to work with the executive team and the board. And if they're willing to change this behavior, that will create a downstream effect that will address most of it. Then we can just do some cleanup around it. And they didn't want to do that. They said there's no way that they're going to go for it. I was like, well, then you can't create change. You're going to just force
Uh,
people to go through trainings they don't want to go through.
you'll be throwing good money after bad if you're just working
Yeah.
with teams, right?
Yeah,
It's
absolutely.
like doing contact tracing in the midst of an epidemic, right? You're trying
Yeah.
to get back to that origin, and
Yeah.
it sits right there in the C-suite, doesn't it?
Yeah. It's consistent. I mean, it's so consistent that I can, if I view enough frontline employees in enough different contexts, you can see the commonalities, and that usually is an indication of values and cultural traits higher up in the organization.
Yeah.
And so I do. You can track that out. Looking through an org chart, you can kind of see the notes. Who leads all of these groups?
Hmm.
And if it's broad enough at the bottom, you see common traits, like this is the executive team without having met them.
Hmm. Yeah,
So
because
my point in that is intentionality. Culture will happen. If you're not getting the culture you want, and you're an executive or leader or owner, it is your fault, to be blunt about it. And
yeah.
so you need to change that and look at, how are my values or behaviors as interpreted and expressed throughout my organization?
Hmm.
If they're not matching up or creating something I want, what do I need to change so that we can begin to get this difference?
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And it's just simply a matter of the human dynamic where we all have weaknesses, we all have strengths, and those weaknesses
Yeah,
get magnified the further down the chain you go
absolutely.
and the
Yeah.
larger the organization.
Yeah. And then if you do the work we were talking about earlier about
Mhm.
defining your values, now you've codified them, or you've written a recipe for them in a
Mm.
way that other people can more easily or more readily understand and use, for training and so on.
So the transformation of culture process begins with leadership.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's amazing. Christian Montine is my guest on this episode of the Work Positive podcast. Christian, you're the author of Train to Lead. Link to getting it on Amazon's there in the show notes, Work Positive Nation. What am I going to discover when I read Train to Lead?
Yeah, so part of my background's in athletics and fitness. I was a strength and conditioning instructor for about 12 years.
Mm.
And one day, this was like a side thing I did while I was as a consultant.
Hmm.
And I just became curious about why we can train athletes to peak out right before their event. Like, good trainers know how to build a training regimen for somebody so they will peak out in 30 days, 90 days. They'll be ready for their event at the best that that person can be. And I thought, why can't we do that with leaders? Why is it with
Mm.
leaders if they get any training at all, it's usually a fire hose of a conference that they're sent to. And it's, there you go. You got the promotion. We trained you. Don't screw up. And
Yeah,
that's the
congratulations.
typical process. I thought, why can't we create a training program similar to how we do it with athletes and line them out? And so what I did is there's a lot of research around what is important for leadership. And I took basically that research and lined it out in a way so that people understand really what do you need to build some competency in first, not necessarily mastery, but competency in before you can begin to build in other leadership skills. And so I introduced the topics and then lay it out in a way that's, in the fitness world, there's a concept called bioavailability. So you can take a vitamin pill and some vitamins just pass straight through your body.
Yeah.
Other ones are bioavailable. You can absorb the nutrients. And what I wanted to do was make leadership material bioavailable, so to speak, so that people could actually find a way to, a new leader could find a way to kind of self-coach themselves and actually grow into the position in a structured process.
So we can train leaders from within the company and they become, and here's your demonstrated career path, should you choose to go this way, and just make that whole process bioavailable. I love that. That is
great. Yeah. Or just, I mean, really leadership's about the person that you are and how you see things and how you relate to others. And then from that, how you align them towards a common direction. And so there's a lot of emphasis on how do you become the kind of person that leads effectively and can align people, and what are some of the skills that go along with that. And regardless of whether you're a frontline supervisor of a coffee shop or you're an executive, a lot of these same concepts will apply abroad or broadly across all of them. And most people haven't been exposed to them, so they find, oh, that's why I've been struggling. I'm really good at this. I'm really good at casting vision for people, but I have a really hard time knowing how to deal with staffing issues. Like, what is it? Why does this keep coming up? And it's because there's a hole somewhere in someone's, I guess, preparation for the role. And so it helps people identify those spots and strengthen those.
So when we go to christianmuntean.com, which also is in the show notes there, for you to click on and go see, what am I going to find there?
Yeah, so on my website, I mean, you'll find information about me, but probably more of interest to a lot of folks is there's a lot of free resources that I have on leadership, on priority management, on working with your teams, how to grow as a leader, and so on. So that would be something I would encourage people to go to, because the access to free resources, that's mostly what you'll find there.
Awesome. So Work Positive Nation always wants to know, Christian, for my guests. So let me ask you, Christian Muntean, what is one thing you would recommend that Work Positive Nation start doing today to create a positive work culture?
I think the two things that I would recommend is, one is look at the results you're getting and then track that back to what have we communicated to people intentionally or unintentionally about our culture or our values. So they're being reflected in some way. What do you see when you actually look at it? And what does it tell us about us? And then second is be intentional about what you do with that information.
And what does that intentionality look like when you see it working best?
It looks kind of like what we described earlier in the show. Like, how do we define what our values are or our desired values? And then how do we describe the behaviors that will reflect those values for us? And then how do we interpret that throughout the organization? And when people begin to not just say things like integrity or community in their values, but they push them through to what this will look like in each department, and how will this look like in everything from recruiting to onboarding to incentive programs and so on, then they start to have a construct that everybody understands within the organization. And this shared perspective and shared behaviors is really what culture is.
Love it. Christian Muntean has been my guest on this episode of the Work Positive Podcast. Christian, I'm better for this conversation, and I know Work Positive Nation is as well. Thank you so much for the gift of your time and wisdom today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It was fun.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Work Positive Podcast. Please share this podcast with your friends who are HR and small business leaders so they can do one thing today to create a positive work culture that increases productivity and profits. I'd like to give you a free Work Positive course just for listening. It's called Something to Talk About, and it's transformed the work conversations of so many people all over the world. Get your free copy when you go to workpositive.today/something to talk about, and you can start transforming your conversations today. Remember, it pays to work positive.